Portal Stories and Other Journeys is an exhibition departing from Asia Art Archive's work on the archive of the late Hong Kong artist Ha Bik-chun. You may ask, who was Ha Bik-chun? He was an artist who lived and worked in Hong Kong. He was born in Guangdong in 1925, came to Hong Kong via Macau in 1957, and passed away in Hong Kong in 2009. During his lifetime, Ha mostly made prints and sculptures, and he also took photographs. He was an artist who never went to art school and left behind a huge archive that included over 100,000 photographic prints of people, things, and events. At the invitation of Ha Bik-chun's family, AAA started working on Ha's archive in 2014. And this project is a very valuable one for us to work on because of the exhibition history that Ha documented, which we see as a key resource for writing Hong Kong's art history. While we are working on Ha's archive, we've already sort of opened it up to, for activation and animation of it with artists, scholars, and curators. And this leads us to this current exhibition, which explores the archive as a space of creativity and inquiry. And we do this by restaging historical objects, archival documents, as well as commissioning new works by contemporary artists. And the exhibition includes commissions by artists Banu Senatoglu, Lam Weng-si, Guan Xuanji, Rux Media Collective, and Ralid Rad. Staged as mini-theatrical sets, these works, as well as our selection from Ha Bik-chun's archive, guide us to explore our sense of scale, of self, and of history. And as we walk through this exhibition, you'll see this archive unfold from 2D into 3D form. Many of us who are not art people may still be wondering who Ha Bik-chun was. Sure, we know he was a sculptor and a printmaker, but what were his works actually like? Ha's first work that was collected by the Hong Kong Museum of Art was called Construction, made and collected in 1967. This work was collected and displayed as a wall-based work, but one day when we were looking into Ha's archive, we found this coded box that says restaurant decoration. And inside this box was a photograph of an interior of a restaurant. The restaurant is now demolished, but on the ceiling of that restaurant is a decoration that looked very much like Ha's 1967 work. And in 1960s and 70s Hong Kong, it was not uncommon for artists to not only make art, but also produce for places such as hotels and restaurants. We went on to borrow construction from the Hong Kong Museum of Art, proposing this current way of installing the work from the ceiling. For us, this set literally shows us other frameworks to look at how Ha's work can exist. One of the most exciting discoveries we made working on Ha's archive was his collage practice, which was not known to the public until 6 years after his death. What you're seeing on the walls are projections of Ha's collage books, and the giant's hand that flipped them belonged to our colleagues who processed these books. The pages we're looking at are weirdly seamless, but it is also clearly visible that they are composed of different images pasted onto the book. And when you flip through these books, you almost cannot control yourself but to touch the edges of the cutouts to see if they really are pasted onto the page. The story was that actually AAA didn't find these collage books. It was the artist Walid Rad who found them when he visited us as an artist in resident in 2014. So we took Walid to Ha's studio at the time, and he pulled out one of these interior design books and asked, what is this and why are these pages completely covered with collages? At that time, we were completely speechless. We had overlooked these books because we were so focused on looking for the exhibition histories in Ha's archive that we could use to write art history. And we had forgotten that when artists make archiving part of their practice, the archive must go over to beyond straightforward documentation and linear history. The archive has to be a creative space, and in this case, pages become walls and walls become pages. What we can also see through Ha's collages is also Hong Kong's history through publications, as Ha collected different printed matter throughout his life and sort of cut them out and put them into boxes. In some of these collage books, it almost looked like Ha was beside himself and had to rehang pictures inside the spaces portrayed in the interior design books. In some of them, he was almost like rewriting art history by inserting non-Euro-American images into what is known as a Western art canon. By the time we had finished processing Ha's archive in 2020, there were over 300 of these modified books. The earliest of them dating 1958, the year after Ha settled in Hong Kong with his family, and the latest of them 2009, the year Ha passed away. Take a look on the horse on your left and the shadow of what looks like a half fish, half human creature on your right. We'll come back to both of them later. So we found the collage books in Ha's studio, and Ha's archive was left in his in To Guan Wan for years before it was moved to a project space in Foshan for processing. Before that move happened, the archive seemed to be static, but it was slowly falling apart. At some point, the concrete ceiling of the apartment started falling, and we had to cover bits of the archive with Tyvek in order to prevent further damage. When Rux visited Ha's studio in 2016, the archive was in this state, its fragments permitting us to experience it spatially, but it could just disappear like any moment of history. Rux was struck by this haphazardness and awkward intimacy and decided to transfer and transform this affective register into a work in this exhibition. And this affective register is not so simply, it cannot be displayed so easily through archival documents. So Rux transformed this feeling of awkward intimacy that they felt intensely into a composite creature that you see. The creature has a sofa component, it has a pre-stitched Tyvek as its skin, and an LED panel at its back that emanates primarily color fields that strewn the thinking studio before we transferred it to Foshan. A table fan murmurs. Rux describes the pictures that they looked at from the archive, and one of the lines goes like this: when a photograph is a photograph of a photograph of a photograph, meaning is possible only when promises begin to break. The work we see now in front of us is a multi-channel video installation by Lam Wing Si, an artist who works with photograph and video. Si is a good 70 years younger than Ha, and this means that the kinds of technology that she has access to and are comfortable with are very different from what Ha used. The visual sources that Si and Ha read and found resonating may also be very different. So our invitation to Si for this exhibition is to think about how it could be possible for an artist to inhabit and contemplate the practice of another who is so differently from her. And in this work, Si sort of revisited sites that Ha frequented when he was still alive and took sound recordings from those places. And she also remixed photographs and sources from Ha's archive to form her own sequence. She also included images and footage from the now that she took, but this is quite barely visible when you look at sort of the entire installation. And through this entire remixing, Si offers her own commentary and critique of another artist's practice in a meditative manner. This set is called an archivist's table, and through this we want to present a space where questions are continuously posed, and also it offers a space where we can present a selection of exhibition documentation that Ha created. But before we look at the two sort of arcs of tables, what we see are a shelf from Foshan that we installed to remind us of where the materials came from. And the serial numbers of the boxes refer to the 30 boxes of photographic materials that we packed out from Ha's archive during our processing. And sometimes the materials look back at us through the eyelets. Another thing that we thought a lot about when putting this exhibition together was how to bring Ha, the artist, back into the exhibition, which is so much about his archive now instead of him. And we end up doing so by creating a video from the point of view of a scanner, scanning Ha's writing, manuscripts, as well as drawing. And it ended up being a very ghostly, lingering presence. And the A4 size red zine that you're looking at is the creation of our colleagues Samantha Chow and Stephen Lam, who turned the complete book list of Ha's personal library into the zine you're looking at. The zine and the book list is possible to compile because every single volume inside Ha's personal library has been gifted to different individuals and institutions. And this library, which was not only part of Ha's personal archive, but a very, very important part of his self-teaching practice, now find new lives in other people's personal libraries. The zine has no front cover or back cover, much like learning has no beginning or end. And on the left side of the zine, you see this sort of very small type font, and it's where the book are listed. And on the right, which is the red pages, they are excerpts of conversations that people had when they encountered Ha's library and the musings that they shared with us as they were taking the books away. One of the 10 sets in this exhibition is a discursive program developed by the artist Benes Anatoglu with AAA's very own Ozge Ersoy for the past 2 years. It's titled Bewitched, Bewildered, Bothered, and this project asks questions around working with posthumous archives, and these questions are not so easily manifest in exhibitionary form. From June 15th to 17th, we, as part of Bewitched, Bewildered, Bothered, we screened a couple of films. One of them is The Proposal by Jill Margit, and the other one, Narcissista Organ Player by Narcissista, as a way to interrogate some of these questions that we want to ask. We also organized 3 panels of conversations, one between Ozge, myself, and Banu, one with Jill, and another with Paul B. Preziato. And through these few days, we moved through various questions surrounding the legacies of those who are dead. Some of them happen to be artists. We also considered notions of access and use, to how the position of the body, legalities, and copyright play out as we sometimes find ourselves dealing with dead people's stuff. These conversations are recorded and you can find them on AAA's website. And as part of Banu's project, we also included a publication, which is the first ever English translation from Turkish of the chapter The Orpheus Double Bind, which is a chapter from the book The Share of the Silent, by the literary critic Nurdan Gurbilek. And this text is a foundational reference for Banu's artistic contribution, which you can also again download from AAA's website. Throughout the 7 years that we worked on Ha's archive, we've consulted and learned from many different projects and books that others have done, and these projects are very inspiring for us. We've therefore selected some of these extended reading and put them on display, which you can see here. And the architecture model here you see is a contribution from our exhibition architects, Sarah Lee and Yutaka Yano. They've been working with us for this project since 2014 and followed very closely how Ha's archive and studio evolved. They even designed our full-time project space as the project changed as well. This model that they made is based on Ha's documentation of the studio in 1986, and we've also placed it next to reproductions of the photograph that Ha took. Throughout the exhibition, we paid a lot of attention to how the same image can appear in different forms, how one picture can appear on a document in one place and appear as a sculpture or a three-dimensional work in another. And here you see Habik Chun's 1967 work Construction again, and this time in its original exhibition catalog, while we've seen it earlier as part of the restaurant set. This story is about Hong Kong artists realizing what they could not do in Hong Kong, but they could do elsewhere, this time in Manila. In 1982, one of the largest exhibitions of contemporary Hong Kong art took place in Manila. There were over 100 works by 16 artists on show at the Metropolitan Museum in Manila, and Ha was one of the participants. This little-known exhibition is important to Hong Kong's art history because not only was it a large show, it was also an exhibition that challenges many misconceptions we may have about both Hong Kong and Manila. Hong Kong at the time didn't really have a fully developed art infrastructure, but Manila did. So the Met in Manila was already a few times bigger than the Hong Kong Museum of Art or the Hong Kong Art Center, which are the prime exhibition spaces in Hong Kong at the time. And like I said, Ha was one of the exhibition participants, and therefore he documented it extensively. Through Ha's documentation of this exhibition, we get to see a more playful, personal side of many Hong Kong artists. In this image, we see artist Antonio Mack, who most of us in the art would know as the sculptor who died very young, horsing around with another artist. They were actually pretending to be a work that Antonio made called Horse and Ladder. And the horse is, of course, a very important motif in Hong Kong art because of the city's love for horse racing. Horse and Ladder became lost after 1982, and Antonio died in 1994. And this is when Ha's archive becomes important, and that how it opens up not the past, but the present and possible future. Fast forward in 2008, the artist Guan Shunji was looking for Antonio's Horse and Ladder in order to make a new commission for a retrospective to pay homage to Antonio. Horse and Ladder was nowhere to be found, and Guan Shunji in response replaced the ladder in Horse and Ladder with a barricade to represent the obstruction he experienced. And the work is titled Iron Horse. Fast forward again in 2020, Guan Shunji saw Ha's photos of Horse and Ladder in Manila and decided to cast the Iron Horse into bronze. And if you're looking for the vitrine here, you'll see Guan Shunji's Iron Horse on the other side. This is the photo documentation of an exhibition titled Being Minorities, which was curated by Oscar Ho, who at the time was the exhibition director of Hong Kong Arts Center. Being Minorities explores how British political power diminished in Hong Kong after the handover to Chinese sovereignty, when the ethnically Chinese population became the dominant force. Other non-Chinese communities in the city continue to be marginalized, invisible within mainstream media and discourse. In response, Oscar invited various contemporary artists to participate in this exhibition. But this exhibition, I guess, is important and interesting for us because of how some of the participants would become AA's collaborators years later. Here, Vivan Sundaram, Vudantan, and Robert O'Brien are seen in the same picture. Vivan and Vudantan would donate their archives to AAA in 2010 and 2012, respectively. And we would speak to Robert O'Brien for an extensive interview on Hong Kong's art history in 2015. If in the collage books we looked at, Ha was rewriting art history, inserting Hong Kong's history into Western art, then what we're looking at here is a history that we are still trying to discover and understand fully. You may have seen this figure in a different place, completely falling apart. But Lo Ting, this half-fish, half-human creature, was first introduced at the Cups of Hong Kong's handover back to China in 1998, again by Oscar Ho, through a series of exhibitions at the Hong Kong Arts Center. This series of exhibitions, and in particular one titled New Lo Ting, Archaeological Find, is one that has sort of captured our imagination and speculation continuously. In this exhibition, Oscar turned the entire exhibition site of Hong Kong Art Center into a mock archaeological excavation site, where artists are not only makers of the objects on display, but also archaeologists who were discovering these objects. In this exhibition, Lo Ting was introduced as a mythical ancestor of people who live in Hong Kong. This half-fish, half-human creature lived both in water and on land, and people said you see it most on Lantau Island. But really, most of us have only seen Lo Ting in photographs by Ha or sort of heard about it through other hearsay. So it seems appropriate that actually in this exhibition, you see its shadow first before you actually encounter the sculpture. So in the attempt of restaging the archive in the physical form, we went looking for the original sculpture of Lo Ting, this figure that emanated from a confused archaeology and a confused history. And of course, we found it in Oscar's office in the university. And we also found out that the original sculpture was crafted by a stage prop designer, Jimmy Cheung, and it was in very bad shape. So after some discussion, we decided to reproduce it here in fiberglass, a smooth, brand new existence, standing behind a screen with the projection of a mountain that might have been Lantau Island. So it's almost like Oscar and Jimmy are also artists for this exhibition, only that they've made this work 20 years before we had a chance to commission them. In this touchscreen TV, there are over 3,500 contact sheets that Ha kept as an index of exhibition histories. They are hand annotated, saying which exhibition happened which year, and was organized chronologically by Ha himself. Here we've transformed the analog material into a digital sensibility through a touchscreen interface that our very own Paco Ma of AAA in Hong Kong programmed with open source software, so thank you very much, Paco. And with these contact sheets, you basically have a bird's eye condensed view of Hong Kong's art ecology from the moment when Ha bought his first camera in 1980. This body of historical information that's very much from Ha's subjective point of view around Hong Kong's art ecology will continue to impact the writing of Hong Kong's art history for a long time to come. We're going to end our tour of Porto Stories and Other Journeys with the first work we encountered in the exhibition space but didn't speak about, which is the work by Walid Rad. The problem of the archive is often what to include and what to exclude, what to keep and what not to keep. But for Ha, it may perhaps be more about what to capture with the camera and what not to capture with the camera, what to cut out from which magazine and which box to put it in. Here you see on this sort of big crate with tiny little boxes and many little mini Ha figures. It's Ha being photographed with his work, with other people's work, Ha being at exhibitions, or Ha photographing someone else photographing something. All these Ha figures are actually selected from Ha's archive, which then we sort of manipulated to different sizes and stacked in different ways. And the more you look at them, the more it seemed unclear whether these mini habituns are jumping out of the boxes or going back into the boxes. What is also very interesting looking at this work is you see how sort of this chain of events and reaction of art, artist, display, viewer, and reproduction are all squeezed into one through Ha's documentation practice and archive. And Walid's work here sort of restages it very, very succinctly. I'm always very interested and sort of intrigued to hear how other people think and write about Ha. And I'll read a little extract from Walid's email to me a few years ago. And it goes like this. Ha seems to me, to Walid, quite alienated from himself. He's also quite disembodied here, even as we see his body everywhere. But the body that emerges is a series of layers, distinct layers. Artwork by Ha, Ha as artist, Ha as friends of artists, Ha as viewer of art, other artists as Ha, equally disembodied even as they have bodies themselves. And my favorite line, of course, is the end of this email that says, maybe that's why collage suits Ha so well.